All right, let's talk about something that's all around us, but pretty much invisible. I'm talking about gatekeepers. These are the forces that are quietly shaping our whole economy. Everything from the apps you use to how much you pay for stuff. And the crazy part? Most of the time, we don't even realize they're there.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, let's just start with something you probably have in your hand right now, your smartphone. I mean, have you ever really thought about who's in charge of what you can put on it? Who decides what you can and can't do with this thing? It seems like a simple question, right? But believe me, it opens up a massive can of worms.
Yeah, that locked box has a name in the tech world. They call it a walled garden. And the classic example, of course, is Apple's App Store. Think about it. Apple is the gardener. They decide which apps are allowed inside the walls and exactly what rules they have to play by. But this whole walled garden thing, it's just our way in. It's a perfect metaphor for a much bigger economic concept we're going to unpack.
So here's what we're going to do. We'll start inside that walled garden, then we'll put a name to the gardener, the gatekeeper, and you'll see how they're absolutely everywhere. After that, we'll get into the tough spot regulators are in, look at some new rules designed to open the gates, and wrap up by asking a pretty big question. Who is really in control of the future? All right, let's start inside those walls. I mean, this is the digital world we all live in every single day, so it's the perfect spot to see just how these gates get built in the first place. Okay, so what exactly is a gatekeeper? This isn't just a catchy phrase. It's the official term, the one regulators and economists use for the power behind these walled gardens. It describes a whole new kind of influence in our markets. So, here's the official definition. A gatekeeper is a huge online platform that's become so essential it acts like a bottleneck. You've got millions of us, the users, on one side, and tons of businesses on the other. The gatekeeper is the one standing in the middle, controlling the flow. To put it really simply, they control who gets in and who doesn't. And if you want to see just how powerful this is, just look at this number. Over 90%. A study in the UK found that more than 90% of all the money spent on search ads goes to one single company, Google. That's not just being the leader in the market, that is complete and total dominance over one of the most important gateways to information in the world. So how do they hold on to this power? Well, a lot of these gatekeepers use the same kind of playbook. For example, they might bump their own products to the top of the search results. That's called self-preferencing. Or they might make you use their other services if you want to use the main one. That's tying and bundling. And then there's the App Store model. They get you to buy the phone, locking you in, and then they charge developers a fortune just for the privilege of reaching you. And this is exactly why policymakers are starting to step in. You've got top economic experts telling the EU this isn't some small problem to fix later. They called it an urgent need. I mean, you can practically hear the alarm bells going off in Brussels. But here's where it gets really interesting. This whole gatekeeper idea, it's not just a big tech thing. Not at all. Once you know what to look for, you start seeing this pattern pop up everywhere, sometimes in the last places you'd expect. So let's take this idea, this gatekeeper lens, and point it at something totally different. How about professional licenses? You know, to be a doctor or a lawyer. Heck, even a tour guide in some cities. You need a license, right? Well, that license is the key to the gate. And the professional board that hands out those licenses, they're the gatekeeper. Now, to be fair, these gates are usually put up for a good reason. The whole point is to protect the public, right? To make sure people are qualified and safe. But there's always a but. There's a flip side. The very same rules that ensure quality can also be used to keep new people out of the market. And when that happens, prices go up and our choices go down. So that brings up a really important question. What happens when the gate is just too narrow? When the rules put in place by these professional gatekeepers actually start causing more problems than they solve? Healthcare is a perfect example. For instance, in a lot of states, you have these incredibly well-trained advanced practice nurse practitioners, APRNs. But to do their job, they legally have to be supervised by a doctor, even for things they are totally qualified to do on their own. And this rule sticks around even though study after study shows that for a lot of primary care services, the quality of their care is just as good as a physician's. And believe me, these gates have real-world consequences. Check out this number, 52,000. That's the projected shortage of primary care doctors in the US by 2025. So when you're staring down a huge shortage like that, a rule that keeps perfectly qualified people from providing care, well, that's not just an economic issue. That's a public health problem. And this all leads to the huge dilemma for regulators. How in the world do you deal with these powerful gatekeepers, whether it's a giant tech company or a professional board, without accidentally destroying the good things they do? How do you avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Because that's really the heart of the problem, isn't it? On the one hand, these gatekeepers can create a ton of value. I mean, a well-managed app store feels safer, and big social networks are useful because they're big. But on the other hand, that exact same power can be used to stomp out competition, reduce our choices, and charge ridiculous fees.
So the challenge is crystal clear. How do you keep all the good stuff, the security, the convenience, the innovation, while putting a stop to the bad stuff, the anti-competitive moves, and the exploitation? That really is the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
So how are regulators trying to tackle this? Well, all over the world, they're coming up with brand new rules, new tools designed for this new kind of economy. Over in Europe, the big one is called the Digital Markets Act, or DMA, and its approach is pretty interesting. First, it just points to the biggest platforms and says, okay, you're a gatekeeper. Then it hands them a list of rules. There's a blacklist of things that are completely forbidden, no questions asked. And then there's a gray list of things they're not allowed to do unless they can make a really good case for why it's actually good for everyone. Now, in the US, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, often goes about it a bit differently. They do something called competition advocacy. So they'll look at a rule, like the one for nurse practitioners, and they'll officially tell a state, hey, you should probably get rid of this unnecessary restriction. They'll even point to other states as natural experiments and basically say, look, see? They don't have this rule over there, and everything's working just fine. All right, so let's zoom out for the final section here. Now that we've got this idea of a gatekeeper in our heads, what does it all mean for what's coming next? Honestly, the most important thing to take away from all this is that you now have a new way of seeing things. It's like a new lens for looking at the world. You can start spotting these invisible gates and the people controlling them everywhere, from the apps on your phone to the ads you see online, all the way to why your healthcare costs what it does. And that leaves us with one last really big question. The fight over today's gatekeepers is happening right now. But technology, it never, ever stands still. So as we look to the future, we have to start asking, who's building the next set of gates? Who's going to be the gatekeeper for AI, for our data, for the very information we rely on to understand our world? That's the next frontier.